and welcome to At the Intersection of Culturally Responsive Teaching and Universal Design. We're very excited for this opportunity to join you again for Able Assembly 2021. My name is Alicia Greene. I'm the Assistant Principal of Community Education at Boston Ballet. I'm also going to be joined today by my colleague Ceclia Watson, who's the Community Education Coordinator for Boston Ballet. I am a Black woman with brown hair, and I am wearing a black sweatshirt from the National Civil Rights Museum at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. You will also, as I said, have the opportunity, though, to meet my colleague, Ceclia Watson, a little bit later in the presentation. Again, we're very excited to be speaking with you today about culturally responsive teaching and universal design. The students in our classrooms arrive with a diverse set of learning goals and needs and a range of cultural experiences and identities. Learning and the ways that a person's brain changes in response to new experiences must be looked at within the context and the culture in which they occur. People from different cultures arrive in our classrooms with culturally based differences, and that influences how they interact with our courses. This doesn't mean that those certain students with certain identities aren't capable of doing higher level work while other students with other identities are not. So in other words, universal design practices and culturally responsive teaching is not about de facto tracking. Rather, by incorporating a range of learning strategies to address multiple perspectives, values, entry points, and opportunities for acquiring and demonstrating knowledge, educators can amplify the benefits of diversity. Our agenda for today, once we get through our following introductions, Celia and I will first introduce a few key concepts and terms to discuss why these philosophies of education matter and how culturally responsive teaching intersects with universal design, and reflect, and then a wrap up. Through our agenda, we are hoping to reach the following four objectives: to create a foundation for learning and engagement and systemic changes towards equity and inclusion, to learn to identify barriers to inclusion and existing policies and practices, i.e. case studies. So we'll be asking questions so that you can bring them back to your organizations and institutions and programs to begin to do some of this work where you're at. Also, we'll be developing a shared understanding of key concepts in organizational change and creating an inclusive workplace. And finally, increase skills and strategies to address manifestations of inequity in systemic and cultural policies and practices. Those are our objectives for today. Please remember though, the work is not the workshop, but it is just a start or a reminder. We've all been living, breathing, and existing in the sea of inequity, and our lives have been informed by it. Injustice is not a new concept, and all of us are at different points in the continuum and different points of the journey. Please give yourself some grace. We're all at different stages of this work. So before we dive deeper into some of these concepts, I want to make sure that we have a set of working definitions so that we all have the same vocabulary to begin with. Social identities are a result of shared constructions and social relations of people who created it based on societal norms. It includes how we define ourselves and how we are perceived by others. Again, it's a result of shared constructions and social relations based from the people who created it based on societal norms. So this is not an exhaustive list. This is just a sample of the most common categories or identities that you'll see on a job application, an intake form. And those are race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, nationality, gender identity, ability identity, religion, spiritual identity, and social economic status. Another definition that is very important for the course of this session is diversity. In this work, most of us have heard diversity, equity, inclusion thrown around a lot. But again, for the sake of this workshop, we're just going to define it so that we all have the same set of working language to begin with. Diversity is variety. It's simply that. Recognition of difference alone does not equal justice or inclusion. A diversity focus emphasizes how many of these we have in a room, an organization, etc. Diversity programs and cultural celebrations or education programs are not equivalent to doing equity work or social justice. It is possible to name, acknowledge, and celebrate diverse cultures without doing anything to transform the institutional or structural systems that produce and maintain racialized injustices or other injustices, for that matter, in our communities and in our institutions and organizations. Also, diversity is not an adjective describing a person or people. Another set of definitions for today, equity is to treat everyone fairly. An equity emphasis seeks to render justice by deeply considering structural factors that benefit some social groups and communities and harms other social groups and communities. Sometimes justice demands for the purpose of equity an unequal response. All of us have privilege and all of us have power. And in this work, that's something else that we must begin to look at is where we sit in each of those spaces, how that informs our work and how that informs our teaching practice, and the work that we do with our students. Also, belonging occurs when there is true equity. It's a felt sense of being valued, seen, and heard all together. Now, the cultural context is what places all of these things. It's the framework, the background, the surrounding circumstances in which communication or an event takes place. Nothing is just information, or we're not just giving our students information. Our lived experiences, our cultural backgrounds are the lenses in which we see the world and interpret this information and informs how we take the information in. The cultural context is also the background or our field of belief systems, our worldview, how we were raised, the perspectives, the people that we've been raised with and around. All that informs our cultural context or the set of cultural lenses through which one views the world and interprets communication. We can never truly lose completely the lenses we were raised with. Why does this matter? Of course, this work matters for many reasons, but to briefly talk about more of a business case at this point, because many of our institutions, organizations, programs have stopped running, our businesses are beginning to close. Why does this matter? Again, it's more of a business case that we're seeing. Companies with inclusive talent practices generate up to 30% higher revenue per employee. Companies in the top quartile for gender diversity are 21% more likely to outperform those in the bottom quartile. Those in the top quartile for racial diversity are 33% more likely to outperform their peers. Greater board diversity leads to lower volatility and better performance. So, what are some culturally responsive techniques? What are some ways we can begin to apply some of this work into our own practice? The first and most important thing is to recognize our own cultural lenses and our own biases. First and foremost, we have to do the work on ourselves as practitioners. We have to first do the work in our own institutions, and we also have to do the work within our own programs first. But it starts with self, it starts at home. Also help students build counter narratives through learning partnerships. meaning there's not just one way of knowing. Help the students build their truth and acknowledge their truth based on their experiences. Also, awareness of the broader social, economic, and political context that some of these issues sit in, but also how the broader social, economic, and political context informs your students and their experiences in your classrooms and in our organizations. And finally, begin to build a community of learners to not only support you in this work, but also to support your students, your colleagues, and again, your organization or your institution. Finally, diversity. Again, a word that you've heard many times, but this is a sample of some questions that you may begin to ask yourself in your own institution, within your own program, where you live. How can we get more diverse people into our pipeline? How can we incentivize recruiting diverse candidates? Why aren't people of differing identities applying for our jobs? And again, we're not just talking about one specific category. We're thinking about all areas. And what does it mean to be inclusive? These again are questions that you can that you can begin to ask within your organization, your institution, or your program. What is the experience for individuals who are the minority within this organization or this program, or in my classroom? What are the barriers that stand in the way of people with marginal identities feeling a sense of welcome and belonging? And finally, what don't we realize we are doing that is negatively impacting our new and more diverse teams? Now, we're going to speak to Celia Watson, and she is going to speak to you about universal design practices and tell you more about how these two concepts come together.
Great. Thank you so much, Alicia. As Alicia mentioned, my name is Ceclia Watson, and I'm really, really excited to be back here for Able Assembly 2021. I am a white woman with brown hair and brown glasses, and I'm wearing a yellow black top. So I'm really excited to be working with Alicia Greene and speaking with her today on how we can tie together the concepts of culturally responsive teaching and universal design for learning. So connecting with some of Alicia's earlier points regarding being aware of your own biases, the work is done at home in yourself, as well as knowledge of the broader social context. We're first going to talk about a mindset shift. So what this really means is a mindset shift, again, begins with yourself, and it's really shifting your mindset to be supportive of everyone's learning styles and welcoming them into your space. So we recognize that everyone has unique and specific needs, and that diversity is the norm, not the exception. And we also want to think about what barriers to access there could be versus blaming an individual that they're not welcome in your space. So how can we remove those barriers so that the participant can better experience your program? And then lastly, how can we change our instruction versus changing the student, right? Again, those barriers can also apply to our direct curriculum in our classes. How can we adapt to better suit the needs of the students? Great, next slide, please. Great, so we're connecting this to the universal design for learning, which began as a concept for architecture, as well as physical space design and planning. So some of you may be familiar with concepts of universal design, making sure buildings are physically accessible, but it is also an approach to curriculum and instruction to meet the needs of the greatest number of users. So when you're thinking about a class, it means that there's multiple means of representation, there's multiple means of expression, multiple means of action and engagement, and there's many different access points and ways for students to show their learning and their work. And the way that we carry out a lot of this universal design principles also tie together with our total language approach. Next slide, please. So one of the first steps of this broader universal design conversation is using inclusive language and communication in your studio. So this comes down to what you say, how you say it, as well as some other suggestions listed here. So really here at Boston Ballet, we focus on individual-based language that is strengths-based. It places the individual before his or her disability. So we would say a person who has low vision versus a blind person. And we really want to have a neutral tone, looking the person directly in the eye, making that eye contact. We're not looking to their family member or their caregiver. Again, we're speaking with the individual. And that goes hand in hand in being flexible for various communication styles. So perhaps someone is using a communication device, if that's augmentative and alternative communication, being open to that and accepting that there's other ways to have a conversation besides verbal language. And lastly, we really don't want to ever confuse communication with competency. So if someone does not communicate in a way that you might typically expect, that does not mean that they're not understanding what you're saying. It just means they're communicating in a way that's different from you. Next slide, please. So we're taking these larger concepts, universal design, culturally responsive pedagogy. Now we're really looking at, in the dance studio, how does some of this come about? So we're going to talk just briefly on, I think, our main aspect of the program, which is really getting to know the students and the families that you work with. One of these is done through our intake interviews, where we have a phone call prior to the dance classes starting that goes over any communication needs, behavior, physical needs, sensory needs, such as light, sound, smell, as well as their goals and what they want out of the program. This is also an opportunity for staff to gain a broader context of kind of where the family's at. And it's important too to be aware of kind of the financial strains of families, especially as many families may have more medical bills than typical families. And so looking at where possible, can you introduce, again, looking at that equity piece, some sort of scholarship or financial aid to allow these families to participate in your program. So really we want to think about those aspects directly with the families, and then lastly with your faculty, preparing your faculty with information they need about the program, preparing the faculty with the information they need about the students, so that all of them have their needs before we go into the classroom, so that the first day can be really successful. And holding professional development training with your faculty prior to the school year is also really important in ensuring that everyone is all set to go. Next slide, please. So to wrap up our conversation today, we just want to reiterate that we think some of these steps we hope are helpful, and we hope that you will be able to create a more inclusive and more culturally responsive dance studio, really by taking time to listen to your families, listen to the individuals, the partners, the staff that you work with, as well as looking at the lenses that we view our programs and building upon your own work. Again, as Alicia mentioned, as a facilitator, as a staff member, as we build together a more equitable and just society through the arts. And on this last slide is our contact information, and we encourage you to reach out if you have any questions or if you'd like further information regarding Boston Ballet's adaptive dance program. We're really, really excited to have the opportunity to speak with you this afternoon, and we hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.